All right, and we'll talk a little bit about other infectious agents. That is a picture of, I believe those are the prions in an E. coli cell. Okay, so first we'll talk about viroids. Viroid is a singular piece of single-stranded RNA, a circular piece of single-stranded RNA, excuse me. So they usually do not code for proteins. They're usually enzymatic by nature, and they lack capsids. So if you look to the right, this is a picture of a viroid. This is actually one single continuous strand of RNA. So it's actually looping around and it's connecting at different points with itself. So they're usually 200 to 400 bases long, and they have large regions of self-complementarity, which is the ability to pair bases with itself, and that's exactly what it does. So any of these circular white regions, they're not paired, but anytime you see these horizontal bars, this horizontal banding down, those are areas of self-complementarity where these bases are attaching to themselves on the same single-stranded RNA. And this provides a little bit more stability for the viroid, because remember, RNAs are very sticky. They're single-stranded and they have very sticky ends. So it's not completely paired with each other, and there are some regions over here and over here, obviously, where they're not complementary. So that's basically what a viroid looks like. They're mostly implicated in plant diseases. I think just only recently there was one pathogenic viroid that was identified in humans, and it's the one that causes hepatitis D. So viroids they don't contain capsids and they don't really code for proteins, so they're not competent in replicating themselves. So they basically have to piggyback off of other viruses. So hepatitis D, for example, they can only enter liver cells by co-infection with hepatitis B. So they'll actually enter the hepatitis V capsid and then basically just use hepatitis B to reproduce themselves. That's really all in terms of the MCAT that you really need to know about viroids. They don't pop up very often. They're super interesting if you're interested in virology, if you're interested in botany also, definitely give them a look. But in terms of the MCAT and the scope of the MCAT, this slide is pretty much all you'll really need to know for them. They don't pop up too often. We also have prions, and those basically, they're just self-replicating defective proteins. So self-replicating means that proteins are directly producing other proteins. And again, you could probably see a sort of theme that's going on with these sort of microscopic infectious agents, is that they're just really not following the central dogma that we've always been taught, how DNA goes to RNA, goes to protein. So like in this case, proteins are self-replicating themselves. And the reason why they're able to do this is because all these prions really are just misfolded versions of proteins that have already been produced. So proteins that you would find naturally accidentally get folded the wrong way. If it's genetic, or if it's transmitted from another organism. When the prion comes into contact with a properly folded protein, it acts as a template and it alters the normal protein into a defective form. So based on any of the forces that we talk about when we're talking about protein folding, we have hydrogen bonding, ionic bonding, disulfide bonds, all of those, van der Waals interactions. It induces this properly folded protein into this misfolded form, and it's defective and it's dangerous. So prions are responsible for diseases in mammals known as transmissible spongiform encephalopathies, or TSEs for short. And these are usually degenerative diseases of the nervous system. So we can usually see this in the brain and the central nervous system, usually the brain and the spinal cord. And really more advanced stages, when you take pictures using various imaging techniques, you'll actually start to see holes in like visible holes in the central nervous system. And that's why it's so degenerative. So in humans, the disease caused by prions are very rare. It strikes about 1 to 2 people per million people. It's a lot more common in, say, bovines or cows. Mad cow disease is a disease that's formed that is prions are responsible for it, and it's the same exact thing. It is a degenerative disease of the cow's nervous system, and it's due to a buildup of these misfolded proteins. One, because the buildup of the proteins is interfering with daily functioning, and 2, because there is a lot less of normally folded proteins, and those proteins are not doing their job. So it can cause neuron death, and this neuron death will lead to loss of coordination. It'll lead to dementia and eventually death. So it can actually take decades for humans to exhibit symptoms of a disease caused by a prion. So it's very quiet. And parasites. So parasites are a little bit larger. They're not subviral. The other two, the prions and viroids, are considered subviral agents, but parasites are a little larger, but they're also much more common than viroids and prions, and I definitely wanted to touch upon them. So parasites are really just organisms that live on or inside a host at the expense of that host. I'm sure we're all familiar with them. Per the CDC, there are 3 classes of parasites. So protozoa are the first type. They are microscopic. Pretty small. They're single-celled organisms that may be parasitic or non-parasitic. And the parasitic ones generally inhabit the digestive tract or the blood and tissue of humans during an infection. And they're cured with antiparasitic or antibiotic medications. Helminths are parasitic worms. That comes from the Greek word for worm. And they are visible to the naked eye. So these are big worms that are parasites that they infect humans, they infect dogs, household pets, if you ever had them. I'm sure a lot of people have had experience with, a pet having worms. So they also may be parasitic or non-parasitic in, by nature, but they do not multiply in their human hosts. So once a worm is in there, it's just going to grow and grow, but it's not going to multiply inside a human body. So they're mostly found in the GI tract, but they can also be found in the blood, lymphatic tissue, and some worms can even be found in subcutaneous tissue by your skin. So ectoparasites are the last class, and these are the larger organisms. They're such as ticks, louses, fleas, lice. So these are the ones that attach or burrow into the skin and remain for relatively long periods of time. Some people may broadly use the word ectoparasite to describe, arthropods like mosquitoes, for example, but they're not generally considered to be ectoparasites because there is not a long period of time which they are attached to the human. So they do, a mosquito, if we're talking about, for example, they will take your blood, it will feed off of a host, but we don't really consider them parasites because they're not attached for a long period of time. Whereas ticks or fleas, they could be attached for weeks or even months.